believe it is our responsibility to resist the injustices done by government in our names. We pledge to bring about freedom and peace. Another world is possible, and we pledge to make it real.
This is Anarchast.
Welcome to Anarchast. I'm super thrilled to have an amazing guest today. We're in Phoenix at the KC Summit called When Money Dies, and one of the speakers, there's many excellent speakers here, and one of them is Lew Rockwell, the man, the myth, the legend, and very thrilled to have you on the show.
Great to be with you, Jeff.
Yeah, I think you probably started almost everything that I'm involved in today. So I think if it wasn't for you, well, I'm not saying you started it, but what I mean is if you didn't do what you've been doing for the last 30 years, there's a pretty good chance that I wouldn't be doing any of this stuff, and a lot of people wouldn't be doing a lot of this stuff. I know you've really affected a lot of people with what you've done. But I don't know exactly, I've never heard how you got started or what your background was. Were you born an anarchist? Or?
Well, you know, Ron Paul says we're born free. He thinks that libertarians have that impulse right from the beginning. And I think that was certainly true of me. My dad was a Taft Republican, I mean, sort of an old right Republican. So he started, you know, that was of course a plus too. But right from the earliest days, even in grammar school, I was arguing with my teachers and on ideological matters. So I've sort of always been involved, and I made one mistake in my life. I got very much involved in the Goldwater campaign as a kid. Gave a lot of money, worked very hard, because I later came to the conclusion the whole thing was just a trick. I mean, it was a trick by sort of the CIA conservatives, Bill Buckley and those people, to end the pro-peace elements of the old right and make everybody a Cold War conservative, which it pretty much did. But then later I had the chance to go to work for a publishing company called Arlington House, which was the only libertarian or conservative publishing house at that time. And one day my boss, Neil McCaffrey, said, "How'd you like to be Ludwig von Mises's editor?" Well, holy smokes, right? So as a very young guy, I got to help publish a new monograph of Mises's and also bring 3 of his books back into print.
Wow.
So that was, that's, you know, how I got my start, but I was already interested in Austrian economics. As a young boy, a friend of my dad's had given me Hazlitt's Economics 1 lesson, and we always read his Newsweek column, my father and myself. So I guess I've been involved in these ideas for a very long time, and it's, of course, a great blessing, great fun and thrill.
And so is your father a lot like yourself? He was sort of a libertarian his whole life, sort of a thing?
Yeah, he was a physician, so I mean, he was mainly that, you know, that was his work. He wasn't doing, as I've had the wonderful chance to do, wasn't able to have these sorts of ideas be his work. But I've had that chance, and it's been quite wonderful. I've gotten to know people like Murray Rothbard and Hazlitt and Mises a little bit.
Really?
Margaret von Mises, his wife, and then his widow very well, and just many of the greats. You know, and Harry Brown, Doug Casey, you, right? I mean, all. So and I became. I didn't start out an anarchist, but I became an anarchist.
Okay, so you were started out as sort of a libertarian.
Libertarian conservative. So I was never happy, for example, with the Goldwater foreign policy, but it didn't bother me as much as it should have. I focused on his domestic things, although that was in a ghostwritten book and it really had nothing to do with his views. He was a bad guy before he ran for president, and after he ran for president, he just talked a good game when he was running, maybe like every politician, right? So, but I've been concerned, because I love Mises, and I became concerned in the 1970s that Austrian economics was disappearing. I mean, that it was sort of going out of existence. Not entirely, but at a very low ebb as compared to what it had been. And also that Mises the man, who was a great hero, was not getting the recognition that he should have. And I think we need heroes, we need role models. And he was definitely, I mean, just a man of tremendous courage and integrity and under extremely difficult circumstances. So not only was one of the great scholars of the Western world, the great economist of the century and all that sort of thing, but he was just a great man. And so some years after his death, a few years after his death, I approached his widow, Margaret von Mises, and I asked her, I said, I'd like to start a Mises Institute, and would would you give me my blessing, and would you give me your blessing, and would you serve as our chairman? So she said, I'll do it on one condition, that you spend the rest of your life at it. So I promised her, and it's been a great time. I've met so many great people, and of course I've helped in some way advance these ideas.
In a big way.
And so it's been very
wow,
terrific.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I learned about this stuff starting around 2003, and the first person who opened my eyes was Doug Casey, and we're at Doug Casey's show.
No, Doug was a great guy.
Yeah. And I've told the story a few times, so I won't bore everybody, but I basically just read one article of his, and it was a real simple article about when you go through customs, don't be nice to the customs people.
Oh, that was a great article.
Yeah,
yes, yeah, I remember that one.
And that just right there, and I just started reading everything he wrote, and that's where I went down the path. So that was around 2003, so I'm about 8 years into knowing all this stuff. So it's very interesting to talk to a person like yourself with this amazing background. You knew Mises, you knew Rothbard, and it's interesting that you say that you thought Austrian economics was dying in the 70s. Can you give us a little bit of background of what you know? Like, when was it popular? I didn't even know it was popular.
Well, it actually was, of course, it was never the mainstream, but it was a far more significant school of thought pre-Keynes. I mean, all during right from the beginning of Menger in the late, in the 1870s, 1880s, followed by Baburg, by Mises, Baburg's student, many other, like Hayek and Rothbard later on, Hoppe and all the great economists. But it was a very significant school. John Bates Clark in this country, there were many American Austrians, and it was a very significant school of thought gaining in influence, and especially because it was the only one then is now able to explain what the heck had happened in the Great Depression, why there'd been a boom, why there'd been a bust. And I would say we were making good progress, and then all of a sudden, like the descent of the night, that's N, not K, came John Maynard Keynes and his book on the general theory. And he supplied a pseudoscientific rationale for all the politicians to do exactly what they wanted to do. Spend, run deficits, tax, control everybody's life. He told them that's the way it should be.
I still listen to him.
Yeah, and of course, to me, you only have to read many other things you could read about Keynes. Henry Hazlitt's great dissection of the general theory would be one example. Mises's essay in Stones into Bread, another great one. But the fact that in the introduction to the Nazi edition of the general theory, and the Nazis were happy to publish the general theory, he said that, of course, his theories were far more compatible with National Socialism than they were with the market economy, and indeed, of course, that's exactly right. But when Keynes just changed the intellectual climate almost overnight, and so the Austrians, I wouldn't say were an eclipse, but they were certainly far less significant, despite having Hayek, despite having Mises. I mean, an intellectual of a very unusual sort. Men like that come along very seldom. Then we had Rothbard, who was a similar kind of giant. But after Mises' death, and after he's no longer writing, Rothbard was marginalized, and I wouldn't say that the school was dying, but it certainly just was at a very low ebb. There were some Sennholz, and there were some wonderful. Hazlitt was still going, but it was like this. And so I thought there needed to be an institute to promote the Austrian school, help fund scholarship, students, try to spread it wherever we could all over the world, because it's a worldwide movement. It's not just an American school. In fact, it's probably the only really international movement in economics besides Marxism. And today, it's booming. I mean, there are Mises Institutes all over the world. There are students everywhere, whether look at Beijing or Sao Paulo or in Prague or Moscow or London, Paris, Madrid. I mean, the magnificent centers of Austrian economics. And more and more students, young people interested in it. Really, it's in a renaissance. So we're still, of course, a small school of thought, but far bigger than we used to be, and the trend line is great. And I think young people realize they're being lied to. They're being taught nihilism, or they're being taught a bunch of lies. And they want something different, and they want something radical. They want something that explains the world. That's the Austrian school.
Austrians are radical.
Yeah, we're all radical.
because,
that's right.
Because we just believe in free markets. It's
Well,
such a
and of course we
crazy
think of
concept.
the root of the word radical, radix, the root. I mean, it means the root. So it's a radical is somebody who goes to the root, is not satisfied with surface explanations.
Oh, okay.
And but of course we're also radical in the other sense, in that we have a very different view of that society ought to be allowed to organize itself and run itself, and that we don't need overlords. We don't need these monsters in government whose only tool is the gun at your head. That we don't need that kind of conduct. Of course, there are always criminals, but we shouldn't have an institution that we bow down to.
Right.
As Lysander Spooner, the great 19th century anarchist, said, the difference between a highwayman and a congressman is the highwayman doesn't ask you to call him the honorable. So, right, so we have all the highwaymen in office, and we need a different way.
Yeah. Now it must be you must feel so amazing that what you started in 1970 is just all over the world now. We had Redmond Weisenberg, who just started Mises Canada.
Yeah, it's great, yes.
Yeah, he was on our program 2 shows ago.
Yeah, he's doing great work there.
Yeah, really nice guy, and yeah, it's just amazing. I've never been to your campus down in...
Well, you need to come and visit.
Definitely, I definitely need to.
Yeah.
I've never been. I'd love to. How big is it now? How many people? Is it?
Well, we try to keep a small staff.
Okay.
Because we don't want to run any debts. We want to be we're very, very conservative financially. We don't do anything till we have the money. And also, I must say, from the very earliest days I started the Institute, I thought there's going to be another Great Depression. And so I want to be prepared financially, and so the Institute can survive another Great Depression. So here we are. And so I think we're okay, but it's because, so we have 16 employees. We don't have a huge number, but we work with part-time people all over the world. We work with faculty in about 75 countries, and many, many different, hundreds and hundreds of universities, and students all over the place. We try not to have a bureaucracy. Of course, a nonprofit is different from a for-profit, and there are, unfortunately, tend to be necessarily bureaucratic aspects. We try to hold that down. We want to be as businesslike as possible, as frugal as possible, and not spend money on things that we don't have to spend money on. So we have the money to teach, to give scholarships, to publish the books, hold the conferences, and so forth, to spread the ideas.
That's
And
great.
have the website.
It must be so interesting for you to have started this in the 70s, 80s, even the 90s before the internet came out, and then to see what happened after the internet. I'm sure you
That's
must,
amazing.
without the internet, I wouldn't know about any of this stuff, and most people wouldn't really. It must be just so exciting for you, a period of time right now, to see how it's all blossoming.
Well, we were thrilled if somebody phoned us and they said, "Hey, Mises Institute," or somebody wrote you and say, "Hey, I've just heard about you," and so forth. But of course, the internet has made a massive change, so that people type Mises into Google or Austrian economics or whatever, they come up with the Mises Institute. We have a great big website, vast numbers of books for free online, and all kinds of audios, videos.
It's an amazing website.
So we try to have everything there. It's all free, and we hope that people make use of it. And certainly, it is the best read, as far as we can tell, institutional website in the world. Commercial economic websites like The Economist or whatever, of course, are in a different category.
Right.
But we're far bigger than the Fed or the Treasury Department or the IMF or the World Bank or those kinds of evil
That's great.
institutions.
So there is hope.
Oh, sure there's hope. Yeah. Because everything is determined, right, by human volition and by human minds, human hearts. We don't have to stick on the present path. We can change things. People have changed things in the past. So
It's happened before.
Well, it's happened before, and we better do it this time.
Well, yeah, I don't want to live on this planet if we don't do something. It's just getting crazy.
But you mentioned anarchism. I mean, when I first started in this movement to be an anarchist, I mean, it was ultra controversial, even within libertarians. I mean, it was considered as something dangerous and off the wall.
Really?
Today, young people are all anarchists. I mean, sort of the limited government thing, which actually has no arguments for it.
Yeah, sorry, I just need to cut you off. We're going to end this segment. We'll come right back and I'll just ask you about that.
Okay, great.